Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Boker Tov, Moedim L'Simcha, almost Shabbat Shalom, and almost Chag Sameach once again. This morning, I wanted to delve into um, the women of Shmot. During Passover, we read all different Passover selections, and this upcoming Shabbat, interestingly enough, I think the last time I taught the Parsha class, it was Beshalach. I'm almost positive that I had the opportunity to teach on Shirat Hayam, and it happens to be the same reading this upcoming Shabbat. So that's a nice coincidence. And I remember teaching about kind of the miracle of the splitting of the sea and asking who was responsible for the splitting of the sea. But this morning, for a little while, I want to explore uh, even though I kind of gave it away already. Who do the rabbis credit with all of the miracles of the Exodus? And so, like I said, I want to study the women of Shemot. But before we do that, I want to look at some of the verses in Shemot. So, if you do have a Chumash, it's chapter 1, beginning verse 9, I believe. One second. Uh, Beginning with verse 8, with verse 8. So if you're following along, fantastic. If not, I'll just read in the English for you. And here we go. Like I said, Shemot chapter 1, verse 8. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are too numerous for us. That's what we're going to look at in a few moments, too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. And so they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors they had made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor, at mortar and bricks, and with all sorts of tasks in the field. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it's a boy, kill him, and if it's a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? And the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. It's a nice adjective. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Then Pharaoh charged all the people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Okay, beginning now, chapter 2. A certain man in the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw how beautiful he was, Kitov, how good he was, she hid him for 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him, and she caulked it, and she put the child into it and placed it among the reeds of the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh, Bat Paro, came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. And she spied the basket among the reeds, and she sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a baby boy crying. She took pity on it and said, this must be a Hebrew child. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter answered, yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, explaining, I drew him out of the water. So I took the time to read part of chapter 1 and 2, because if you listen to the verses making up the introduction to, if you will, the Exodus story, you hear how imbued within the story are the actions of women. And so I just want to go through some of those verses and listen to pieces of the Midrash and pieces of the Talmud that ask the questions that I think that we were asking, or at least I know I ask when I read those verses or hear those verses. One of the first questions that we ask, the Egyptians grew to hate the Hebrew slaves. And one of the reasons why, or the reason why they grew to hate the Hebrew slaves, is because no matter what they did, the Hebrew slaves increased and multiplied. And so the question, so meaning that they tried to stop kind of the birth rate, but there was no possible way for the Egyptians to kind of stem that increase. We just kept multiplying. Hope you're enjoying your instant coffee this morning. Passover instant coffee. So this is one of the questions that's asked in Midrash Tanchuma, also asked in Sota in the Talmud. How did the Hebrew slaves increase, and who was responsible for that vast multiplication? So I want to read to you a little bit of this incredible piece of Midrash. And by the way, I don't want us to take it for granted that so much of the Exodus story, when you're actually hearing the biblical verses, have to do with women. And the answers to these questions, why or how are all these miracles taking place, that the answer given by the rabbis is women. And we shouldn't take it for granted. It's pretty incredible that women are given the credit. So here is the Midrash on the verse for chapter 1, verse 12 in Shemot. The more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. Said Rabbi Akiva, in the merit of the righteous women of that generation were the Israelites delivered from Egypt. So Rabbi Akiva is already answering the question, who's responsible for the survival, really, of the Jewish people, of the Hebrew slaves? It's to the merit of the righteous women. But of course, the Midrash continues, because we have to understand how that happened. You can't just say the women were responsible. How were the women responsible? At first, Pharaoh insisted, this is the Midrash that continues, only that they make the prescribed number of bricks each day. Then he commanded that they should not be allowed to sleep in their homes, so that they should not be able to have children. So the taskmaster said to them, if you go home to sleep, you will lose a few hours each morning from your work when we send for you, and you'll never complete the allotted number. So they made them sleep on the ground out in the field. Okay, so I hope you're let's parse this out for a second. So what happened at first? How did Pharaoh kind of increase the bitterness of their work and of their lives? So first, Pharaoh just insisted that the number of bricks the Hebrew slaves were supposed to make each day, his kind of first order to embitter their lives was to increase that number. Okay, but then it didn't matter. That wasn't enough for him. He wanted to magnify the bitterness against them. So then he said, okay, Hebrew slaves, you can't go home to sleep in your own beds. And this reason, not only is it just to kind of embitter their lives by not being able to go home, but this was also a practical order, because if they go home, then there's a chance to procreate. So they shouldn't be able to go home and have children. And so kind of the overseers said to the Hebrew slaves, listen, you can't go home. If you go home, you'll lose precious hours during the day or even during the night to really kind of during those latter parts of the day to do work. So you're not going to sleep at home anymore. What we're going to do is that also includes travel time back and forth. So from now on, you're going to sleep on the ground. You're not going home. This is a terrible conundrum. Not only do they not get to go home to rest and see their families, but they don't get to go home to procreate. So, how do we ensure the continuity of the Jewish people if we're keeping the men out of the homes? So that's what the Midrash asks. What did the daughters of Israel do? It doesn't say, it specifically says, what did the daughters of Israel do? And this is what they said. They would go down to draw water from the river. I love this kind of fantasy. Listen. And God would send them small fish into their pitchers, which they drew up half full of water and half full of fish. Then they set 2 pots on the fire, one for hot water and one for the fish. They sold the fish and they bought wine, which they carried to their husbands in the field. And they washed and anointed and they fed them and they gave them to drink. And they would take out their mirrors and look into them with their husbands, teasing them, saying, "Look, I'm more beautiful than you." Thus arousing their desire and cohabiting with them at the borders of the fields, as it is written, when you lie between the borders, in Tehillim. It was with these mirrors, apparently, which God later commanded Moses to use in the making of the washstand in the sanctuary. Now, after the women had conceived, they returned to their homes. And when the time of childbirth arrived, they went and they were delivered in the field beneath the apple trees. And God sent an angel from the high heavens who washed and straightened the limbs of the babies in the same way that a midwife straightens the limbs of a child. And when the Egyptians noticed them, they went to kill them. But a miracle occurred, and the children were swallowed up by the ground. Now, you are going to think this is crazy. What is this story? Don't forget, Midrash, it interprets a verse, and sometimes in the way of interpretation, it gives kind of like a fantastical reason. And I just love this idea that the rabbi said, well, somehow the Hebrew slaves increased and multiplied and defied the odds. So let's come up with a story. And so their story was that the daughters of Israel took it upon themselves to go find their husbands wherever they were in the fields. They weren't allowed to go home. So wherever they were in the fields, they were going to find them. And they somehow had enough money because they sold fish that God miraculously provided for them. They sold fish. They had enough wine to kind of gladden their husbands. They were able to cohabit with their husbands, but then you have to ask the question, okay, great. They were able to be with their husbands and they were able to get pregnant and have children. But of course, the Egyptians weren't going to allow, these children to come into the world. So what happens? It says that the ground underneath the apple trees would kind of swallow up the kids and hide the babies for just enough time so that the Egyptians couldn't find the babies. It's just a fun, I don't know, silly story that we know did not happen, but just shows that throughout time, first of all, not only do the rabbis give women credit, which they do, but also the rabbis would kind of create stories that show that with faith and with courage and with creativity, the Jewish people would forever endure. And by the way, I said this a few weeks ago in a video, but often people will ask, why do we use the haroset mixture of apples and walnuts? And some people use honey and cinnamon. I use dates this year. Some people use banana. And one of the reasons why we use apples comes from this midrash that the children of Israel were saved underneath the apple trees. And so it's also another reason it's not just the mortar in the bricks that we use charoset to kind of symbolize that piece of the Seder, but it's also this midrash where the children of Israel are saved by existing under the apple tree. Okay, that was a very complicated midrash to begin with, and so I'll try to offer a few others that just kind of give us another lens into the women of Shemot, the women of the Exodus. So who are the midwives? Who are these incredible women that apparently, yes, we just said it was kind of the wives that started the saving of the Jewish people, but listen, the story of the midwives is pretty incredible. And so let's see. seeing this piece of midrash that I want to offer you. Okay, so the question is, who are the midwives? And there are lots of different interpretations as to who the midwives are. Rav and Shmuel disagree as to the proper interpretation of who the midwives are. One says that the midwives were a woman and her daughter. Another says a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law. And the one who says that they were a woman and her daughter, that answer is Yocheved and Miriam. And then the other interpretation, which I always forget, is that sometimes people think that the midwives are Yocheved and Aaron's wife, Elisheva. I always forget that interpretation. Now, why would we call them Shifra and Pua? Why wouldn't we just call them Yocheved and Miriam or Yocheved and Elisheva? And there's significant reasons as to why we call the midwives by these names, Shifra and Pua. So one interpretation is Shifra. Why is she called Shifra? It's because she would prepare, Mishaperet, the newborn. That's kind of a nice idea that this was the woman who would get the newborn ready. And then I really like this, why Pua, which is a reference to Miriam. And I love this. This is such a maternal answer. The reason why she was called Pua is because she would make a comforting sound, Poa, when she would remove the child. And you can kind of think of a mother or whomever is delivering a child saying, po, 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 like almost in a relaxing, or anytime someone's holding a baby, it's like but to kind of not only relax the mother, but also remember we're delivering babies that are supposed to be killed. And so it's kind of a soothing sound to quiet the child. So that is Shifra and Pua. Those are the midwives who are truly given credit as to continuing the survival of the Jewish people. Like we said, could be Miriam, could be Yocheved, could be Elisheva. And then there is another woman that I want to highlight just for a few moments, and that is Bat Paro. And so what we're told is a miracle was performed when Bat Paro goes down to the river. And, this is a woman who has grown up in Pharaoh's palace. You can only imagine what she has seen, what she has heard. And what we're told is that Amata can be the name of another name of a handmaiden, like a kind of a slave girl, that the Amata is what, or sorry, rather, who ends up saving Moses. Now, what's interesting and the way the rabbis play with it is that they say, no, it wasn't Amata. It wasn't her shifchata. It wasn't her handmaiden that saved Moses, but rather, if you play with what they call, this is in Sota, I'm going to read the piece. It says, but according to the grammar of the holy language, if it was Amata, it should have been written with a dagesh. It should have been written with kind of a dot in the mem. And the reason why they explained amata is actually to refer to at yada, that she stretched forth her hand. And this is a really interesting idea. It says that scripture intentionally uses this term to indicate that her hand, that bat paro, that the daughter of Pharaoh's hand increased in length several cubits, and a cubit, in order that she might more easily reach the cradle. So if I can kind of give you the imagery, imagine this princess who is kind of standing on the edge of the river to bathe herself, to anoint herself, and her hand is just not quite, hand is not quite long enough to reach this cradle that she kind of sees out of the corner of her eye. And this isn't a stupid woman. This is a smart woman. She knows why cradles are floating down the Nile. Okay, it's probably, again, not the first conversation or kind of first image that she's conceived of, hearing that baby boys are being killed during this time. But something within her is roused, whether it's a divine inspiration, some kind of miraculous sensation, that her hand stretches out. A miraculous act takes place where her hand stretches out far enough that she's able to reach this cradle, that she's able to reach Moses. Now, I wanted to read one more thing for you. Mm. She ends up, if you heard me at the beginning, I tried to emphasize that idea that Moses was so beautiful that he's basically called Tov. But at the end of the day, it's Bat Paro, a non-Jewish woman who performs this miracle, who ends up naming Moses, um, saying drawn from the water. And no one changes his name. And so it becomes the miracle and the act of a woman that allows for the man who truly acts as God's partner, and acts as the hero of the Jewish people. Who's behind this man? Several women, several women. Okay, so that's Bat Paro. And let's see, I want to give you just one or two more pieces, and that is about Miriam. So we'll conclude with Miriam. So going back uh, to the beginning of chapter 2, remember there was a man of the house of Levi, and he took to wife a daughter of Levi. So who's this man, first of all, and what did he do? So this is Moses's father, Amram. He was one of the greatest men, according to the Talmud, of his generation. And when he saw that Pharaoh decreed, every son that is born you shall throw into the river, he was in deep despair. And according to the Talmud, this is what he says: we are laboring for nothing, meaning we just keep working and working and working, and we're just going to be worked to the bone, and it doesn't matter because our people won't endure. And so he thought to himself, forget this. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? I'm not going to see my wife anymore. I'm not going to see my family anymore. And so he decided to go and divorce his wife because he was just kind of at the end of his rope. Well, because like I said, he was one of the greatest men of his generation, all of the Israelites, according to the Talmud, followed suit and they divorced their wives. But his daughter, and who's his daughter? Miriam said to him, Father, basically, are you joking? Your decree in divorcing your wife and just saying, forget it, I'm done. I have nothing else to live for. Your decree is more severe than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh decreed only against the males, but you've decreed against everyone. Pharaoh decreed only concerning this world, but you have decreed concerning this world and the world to come. Meaning, you have no idea what's going to happen in future generations, but you're just making a blanket statement that the Jewish people are over. How dare you? In the case of the wicked Pharaoh, there is a doubt whether his decree will be fulfilled or not. Right? We don't know if Pharaoh is going to succeed. But in your case, meaning divorcing your wife and encouraging others to kind of end their marriages and end procreation and end continuity, it's done. Your decree will be fulfilled. So he listened to his daughter, and Amram went and he remarried his wife, and they all took back their wives. And so when this happened, there was basically kind of a great party, and the ministering angels proclaimed a joyful mother of children. That was said about Amram's kind of his act and his reunion with his wife. So when you say, or when you ask the question, who is responsible for the redemption of the Jewish people, and we credit the women of Shemot, the women of Exodus, here is Miriam, of course. Okay, two more pieces of Miriam, and we're going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes. Miriam the prophetess, so this is Shemot 15:20. Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dances. And the Mechilta asked the question, how did the Israelites have tambourines in the desert? This is one of my favorite questions. The righteous women of that generation were certain that God would perform miracles for them, and they prepared tambourines and dances while still in Egypt. Meaning that the women of the Exodus had faith. They didn't know the exact outcome, but they had faith that they would survive. And so when they left and they fled Egypt, they took a chance and they packed tambourines because they had a feeling that at the end of their story, it's not really the end of the story, but at least the end of this chapter of the story, they would be able to celebrate and they would be able to dance. Okay, the final piece that I want to leave with you is this. The Lubavitcher Rebbe gives us a beautiful insight about Miriam. We learn, Miriam dies in the desert, and one of the miracles that Miriam carried with her was that wherever she went, there was a well of water. That's what she's associated with. It's one of the reasons why we have a kos Miriam, a cup of Miriam. Some of us put that on our Seder tables. And this is what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says about Miriam. He says, a person may ingest the ingredients of life, but these will not vitalize him without the fluids that course through his body. The food swallowed by the stomach, the oxygen drawn in by the lungs must now be transported through the body's canals and made to saturate its every cell. Therein lies the spiritual significance of Miriam's role as Israel's provider of water. Miriam first appears in the Torah as a children's nurse, one who distills adult food for the consumption of a child, one who trains and educates a growing human being, filtering the stimuli of an adult world for his maturing mind, who processes the raw materials of life to meet the specific needs of her charge's age and phase of development. Miriam's well is the vital fluid of Israel's spiritual life, the water that inculcates them with the knowledge and identity her brothers provide. The waters of Miriam transport and apply the nutrients of Torah and the abstractions of faith to each individual on his or her particular level. So with that, I conclude this morning. I hope that you were able to gain an extra lens as to the spiritual nature of each of the women of Shemot. I know I wasn't able to cover everyone, but you were able to get a sense from really those beginning chapters, those beginning verses of Shemot, that the women of the Exodus had a huge role to play in the continuity of the Jewish people. So I hope you enjoyed a little Torah study this morning, and maybe you'll use it as inspiration for these